Thrown out on Christmas night, a little girl cried for help. Then 200 Hell's Angels arrived. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get into today's heart-stopping story. It was the night before Christmas, and the streets were eerily quiet. The cold winter air bit through the streets of a small town in Northern California. The snowflakes danced softly in the air, coating everything with a thick, icy blanket. The warmth of the holiday spirit was nowhere to be found on the dark, deserted roads. In an alley behind an old diner, a small figure could be seen huddled under a thin, ragged blanket. Her tiny body shook with the cold, but it wasn't just the freezing temperature that caused her to tremble. Her name was Lily, a 7-year-old girl, abandoned by her own mother on Christmas Eve. The harsh words still echoed in her ears. "You're a burden. I can't do this anymore," her mother had shouted, before slamming the door and leaving her out in the snow. Lily had tried knocking on every door, begging for help, but no one answered. Her heart raced with panic, her small hands frozen as she clutched the frayed edges of her blanket. She didn't know what to do. She was just a little girl, alone in the world, with no one to turn to. As she sat in the snow, her eyes filled with tears, she whispered into the night, "Please, someone help me." Her voice barely broke the silence of the frozen street, but it was enough. Across town, a rumbling engine pierced the quiet. Jake Reaper Morrison, a member of the notorious Hell's Angels, revved the engine of his Harley-Davidson as he made his way down the empty road. He had just finished a long ride through the countryside and was heading back to his club's headquarters when he heard it. The sound of a faint cry for help carried through the night air. Jake wasn't the type to stop for strangers. He was a hardened biker, known for his tough exterior and dangerous reputation. But something about the cry tugged at him. He slowed down, his eyes scanning the street as his Harley purred softly beneath him. That's when he saw her, Lily, sitting alone in the alley, her face streaked with tears, her small body shaking from the cold. Without thinking, Jake pulled his bike over to the curb and cut the engine. He walked toward her, his leather jacket creaking as he moved, his boots crunching the snow beneath him. "Hey, kid," he said, his voice gruff but gentle. "Are you all right?" Lily flinched, looking up at the towering figure before her. The man was covered in tattoos, his face hardened by years of living a life most people could never understand. The Hell's Angels patch on his jacket sent a shiver down her spine. She had heard the stories. Bikers were dangerous. They were the kind of people who didn't care about anyone but themselves. Her small body instinctively pulled away, but Jake's voice softened as he crouched down to her level. "It's okay," he said. "I'm not here to hurt you. I just want to help." Lily's eyes darted nervously around, unsure if she could trust him. But there was something in his tone, something in the way he looked at her that made her feel just a little bit safer. She slowly let go of her blanket and wiped her eyes. "Please, I don't have anywhere to go." Jake's heart tightened at the sight of her, alone in the cold, with no one to care for her. He took off his leather jacket and wrapped it around her shoulders, his hand lingering for a moment on her tiny frame. He could feel the chill radiating from her body. "You're safe now," he said. "Come on, I'll take you somewhere warm." As they made their way back to his bike, Jake couldn't help but think about the life he had left behind. He had seen things, done things that had hardened him over the years. But in that moment, as he looked down at the little girl who had no one, something stirred inside him. He wasn't just a biker anymore. He was her protector, and he was going to make sure no one ever hurt her again. I can feel the warmth of the jacket surrounding her tiny frame, and though it's not much, it's enough to stop her from shaking. Jake helps her onto the back of his Harley, careful not to hurt her fragile body. The snow is falling harder now, the storm beginning to rage, but he doesn't mind. The ride will keep him warm. As he starts the engine, the rumble of the bike fills the air, and he looks back at her, seeing her wide eyes looking up at him, full of uncertainty but also a glimmer of trust. "Hold on tight," he says, his voice low but kind. The wind picks up as they head toward the outskirts of town, where Jake lives in a small, run-down garage. It's not much, but it's home. He takes the long, winding road that cuts through the woods, the tires of the Harley crunching over the snow. He doesn't speak, but his mind is racing. He's never been this close to anyone, especially not a kid. His life has been all about keeping people at a distance, living in the shadows, the rough and tumble world of the Hells Angels always coming first. But something about her vulnerability, pulls at something deep inside him, something he thought he'd buried a long time ago. The bike slows down as they reach the garage. Jake pulls into the dirt driveway and cuts the engine. It's late, and the lights in the garage flicker to life as they enter the small space. The walls are lined with tools, bike parts, and a few old leather jackets that Jake hasn't worn in years. It's not much, but it's all he has. Come on, Jake says softly as he helps Lily off the bike. She stands wobbly for a moment, her legs stiff from the cold, but she steadies herself. We're safe here. He guides her inside the garage, where a small cot and a makeshift kitchen sit in the corner. It's a far cry from the warmth and comfort of a real home, but it's enough for now. You can rest here, Jake says, pointing to the cot. He goes over to the small kitchenette and starts making a pot of coffee. It's the only thing he knows how to do in this kind of situation, to keep busy, to focus on something that isn't the overwhelming feelings swirling inside him. Lily stands by the cot, looking around with wide eyes. Is it okay if I stay here? She asks hesitantly. Jake turns to her, meeting her gaze. Of course, he says, his voice low and reassuring. You're safe now. No one's going to hurt you here. The words feel foreign on his tongue, but they are true. He doesn't know what he's doing, but somehow he knows that keeping her safe, at least for tonight, is the right thing. He pours the coffee into 2 mugs and walks over to her, handing her one. Here, drink this. It'll warm you up. She takes it hesitantly, still unsure of him, but she drinks, slowly at first, then more eagerly as the warmth fills her. Jake watches her closely, noting the way she holds the mug with both hands, her small fingers wrapped around it tightly. What happened to you, Lily? He asks, his voice softening. She looks up at him, and for the first time, there's no fear in her eyes. Only sadness. My mom, she left me, Lily says, her voice barely above a whisper. She said I was a burden. She said she couldn't take care of me anymore. The words hang in the air, thick with pain. Jake's heart sinks. He knows what it feels like to be abandoned, to feel like you're not wanted, like you don't belong. But he also knows what it feels like to survive, to keep going even when everything seems lost. He sits down next to her on the cot, taking a deep breath. You're not a burden, he says firmly. You're not alone. I won't let anything happen to you. Lily looks up at him, her eyes searching his face, as if trying to decide if she can believe him. And for a moment, there's a flicker of hope in her eyes. Thank you, she whispers. Jake nods, not trusting himself to speak. He's been through a lot in his life, but this is different. This feels like something worth fighting for. He stands up, the weight of his decision settling on his shoulders. Get some sleep, he says. We'll figure things out tomorrow. But as he walks to the corner of the garage, where he sleeps on a cot of his own, his mind races. He doesn't know how he's going to keep Lily safe, but he knows he can't let her go. He has to protect her, and he will. For the first time in a long while, Jake Morrison has a reason to fight. I had barely closed my eyes when I heard a soft knock at the door. It wasn't even dawn yet, but there was something about the urgency in the sound that made me sit up straight. I had expected the night to pass quietly, but that was before Lily had come into my life. I rubbed my eyes and stood up, the hard mattress creaking beneath me. Stepping over to the door, I cracked it open just a few inches. There she was, standing on the threshold, her small figure silhouetted against the pale light of the early morning. I'm hungry, she whispered, her voice small, as if afraid of waking the world. Can we eat something? I nodded and motioned for her to come in. Of course. Let me see what I can find. She stepped inside, looking around the garage like it was the first time she had truly noticed her surroundings. The cluttered shelves, the oil stains on the floor, the workbench stacked with tools. Nothing here was meant for comfort, but it was all we had for now. I walked over to the small kitchen area, which consisted of a battered coffee pot and a small counter littered with cans and dry goods. The smell of old coffee lingered in the air, and I quickly prepared something simple, a bowl of oatmeal. I placed it on the table, along with a spoon, and sat across from her. She eyed the food carefully but didn't start eating right away. Instead, Her gaze drifted around the room, her face still carrying that look of quiet sadness. "Thank you," she said softly after a moment, breaking the silence. "For letting me stay." I nodded, not really knowing how to respond. I had no clue what I was doing, but something about her presence felt right. I was supposed to be protecting her now. "You're welcome," I finally said, my voice a little rougher than I meant it to be. "You're safe here, Lily. I won't let anyone hurt you." She nodded, though she didn't seem fully convinced. It was clear that trust wouldn't come easily to her, not after everything she had been through. She started eating slowly, as if savoring the warmth of the food in her hands. The silence between us was comfortable, but it was also filled with an unspoken understanding. The night before, I had promised to keep her safe, but I still didn't fully know how. I had a reputation, a past that wasn't exactly friendly, and the life I lived was anything but peaceful. But that didn't matter right now. What mattered was that this little girl needed someone to care for her, and I was the only one standing in her way between her and a world that had shown her nothing but cruelty. After she finished, she glanced up at me, her big brown eyes searching my face. "Do you think my mom will come back?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The question hit me like a punch in the gut. I didn't know what to say. "I don't know," I admitted. "But I know that you don't need her to be safe. You've got me now." She looked uncertain, but there was something in her expression that made me feel like I had said the right thing. I stood up and wiped my hands on my pants. "I'll take care of you," I said, my voice firm now. "I promise." She didn't respond at first, but then she reached out, almost shyly, and grabbed my hand. It was a small gesture, but it felt like the first step toward building the trust one had to earn. "Thank you," she said again, and this time, it was different. There was something real in her words, something that made me feel like she was finally starting to believe that she wasn't alone anymore. As I looked down at her, I felt a sense of responsibility settling in my chest. This wasn't just a temporary fix. This was my life now. I had promised to keep her safe, and I would, no matter what. Outside, the snow continued to fall heavily, but inside the garage, there was a warmth that had nothing to do with the heater. It came from something deeper, from the commitment I had made to her, from the quiet bond that was beginning to form between us. I wasn't sure where this path would take us, but for the first time in a long while, I was ready to walk it. The sound of the storm outside grew louder, but I didn't feel scared. I had something to protect now, and I wasn't going to let anything take that away. I woke up to the sound of the wind howling outside, the heavy snow still falling in thick sheets. The garage was cold, but the warmth between me and Lily was enough to keep us both grounded. I had promised her safety, but there was a gnawing feeling in my gut that told me it wasn't going to be easy. The night had been quiet, and for the first time in a long while, I slept soundly, knowing that Lily was just a few feet away. But today was different. Today, things were going to change. I had no idea what to expect, but the world outside was still a dangerous place, and Lily had already been through enough. I stood up from my cot and stretched, my joints creaking in protest. The garage was silent except for the soft hum of the heater, and I could hear Lily stirring in the corner where she had fallen asleep. I walked over to the small stove and began making some coffee. I could feel the weight of the day ahead settling on my shoulders. When I turned around, Lily was sitting on the edge of the cot, her small feet swinging in the air as she watched me. Her big brown eyes seemed a little less afraid, but there was still a wariness in her gaze. "Good morning," I said softly. She smiled, but it was hesitant, like she wasn't quite sure what to make of this new life. "Morning," she replied, her voice small but clear. "What are we going to do today?" I paused, unsure how to answer. "Well, we need to figure things out," I said, pouring the coffee into 2 mugs. "We're not staying here forever. I want to make sure you're safe, and that means we need to figure out where we can go." She nodded, but I could see the fear creeping back into her eyes. "But where will we go?" "I don't have anywhere else," she said quietly. The words hit me harder than I expected. I had known she was abandoned, but hearing her say it out loud, so simply, made it real. She had no one. And for a moment, I didn't know how to respond. But then something inside me hardened. I wasn't going to let her down. Not now. Not ever. "You're with me now," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "And I'll make sure you're not alone. We'll figure it out together." I handed her a mug of coffee, and she took it carefully, her hands still trembling slightly. I sat down beside her, the weight of the promise hanging heavy in the air. I don't know what the future holds, I said, but I'm not going anywhere. You're safe here for now. She looked up at me, her face softening just a little. Thank you, she whispered. I could feel her starting to trust me, just a little, but it was a start. As the day passed, we spent hours talking, trying to figure out our next move. But it wasn't easy. I had a life that wasn't exactly normal. I had connections, sure, but most of them were with people who didn't exactly have Lily's best interests at heart. And the Hells Angels weren't exactly known for their kindness. But I couldn't go back to that life. I couldn't let Lily slip through the cracks like so many others. I knew the streets were full of danger, but I also knew there were people who could help. I just had to figure out who. As the evening drew near, the snow began to slow, and the streets outside grew quieter. I looked over at Lily, who was sitting on the floor, her eyes scanning the small room. Do you feel better? I asked, trying to break the silence. She nodded. I think so. I'm still scared, she admitted. I knew exactly how she felt. Fear had always been a part of my life, a constant companion. But there was something different about this. I had a reason to fight now. I understand, I said, my voice low. But you don't have to be scared here. Not anymore. I could see her eyes searching my face, trying to gauge if I meant it. And I did. I would protect her, no matter what. We'll figure this out, I said again, more for myself than for her. The night fell over the garage, the dark shadows stretching across the walls. I knew we had a long road ahead, and there were still so many questions I didn't have answers to. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was doing something right. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but I was ready to face it because Lily wasn't alone anymore. I wasn't going to let her down. I woke up to the sound of the wind still howling outside. The snow had stopped falling, but the bitter cold lingered in the air. I turned over to see Lily still asleep on the cot, wrapped up in my old jacket. It was the second morning since she came into my life, and already I could feel something shifting inside me. I wasn't used to this feeling of responsibility, of needing to protect someone. But there was no turning back now. She needed me, and I had promised I wouldn't let anything happen to her. I stood up and stretched, the ache in my back reminding me of the long nights I'd spent on the road, of all the years I'd lived without caring about anyone but myself. But now, as I glanced over at Lily, it was different. There was something worth fighting for. I quietly walked over to the small kitchen area and made some coffee. The small pot gurgled as the coffee brewed, the steam rising up into the cold morning air. I poured 2 mugs and set one on the table for Lily when she woke up. I sat down, the chair creaking under my weight, and took a sip, my thoughts still racing. I had no idea what to do next. The garage was safe, for now, but it wasn't enough. I couldn't keep hiding out here forever. Eventually, someone would come looking for her, and when they did, I wasn't sure what I'd be able to do. The idea of sending her back to the life she'd come from was unbearable. I couldn't do that to her. As I sat there, lost in thought, I heard movement from the corner of the room. I looked over to see Lily slowly waking up. She rubbed her eyes and yawned, sitting up on the cot. Her face was still soft, but there was something harder in her eyes now, something that hadn't been there before. She had been through too much, and it was starting to show. "Morning," she mumbled, her voice still quiet but more confident than the day before. "Morning," I replied, forcing a smile. "You ready for some coffee?" She nodded and got up, walking over to the table. She hesitated for a moment before sitting down, her small hands wrapping around the mug. She didn't drink it right away, though. She just stared at the steam rising from the surface, deep in thought. "What are we going to do now?" she asked, her voice soft but full of concern. I didn't have a good answer. "We'll figure it out," I said, trying to sound more certain than I felt. "We'll find a place where you'll be safe, where you won't have to run anymore." She didn't respond, but I could see the weight of her worries in her eyes. She wasn't a little girl anymore. Not really. Not after everything she'd been through. "Do you think anyone will come for me?" she asked suddenly, breaking the silence. The question caught me off guard. I hadn't thought much about it, but now that she'd brought it up, I realized the truth. Someone would eventually come looking for her, whether it was her mother, the authorities, or someone else entirely. "I don't know," I said honestly, "but I'll make sure you're not alone when it happens." She looked up at me, her eyes searching my face for any hint of reassurance. I met her gaze and said, "I won't let anyone hurt you. Not while I'm around." She nodded slowly, but the fear still lingered in her eyes. It was clear she didn't fully believe me yet, but I was determined to change that. I would do whatever it took to prove that she was safe with me. We spent the rest of the morning planning, though neither of us really knew what to do. I wasn't in a position to run away with her, not with my past catching up to me. And I couldn't keep her in this garage forever. But as I sat there, watching her drink the coffee I'd made, something inside me clicked. I wasn't going to run. Not anymore. I was going to stand and fight. For her, for both of us. We might be up against the odds, but I wasn't going to let her go. Not after everything she'd been through. Not after I'd promised. We'll figure it out, I said again, my voice more determined this time. But you're not alone anymore, Lily. I'm not going anywhere. She looked at me for a long moment. Before nodding. For the first time since she'd arrived, I saw a small spark of hope in her eyes. And that was all I needed. Because as long as she had hope, I wasn't going to stop fighting. Not for her. Not for us. I could feel the weight of the promise in my chest, the responsibility heavy on my shoulders. The idea of keeping Lily safe had begun to feel more like a mission, one I couldn't back out of, no matter the cost. We were still in the garage, hidden from the world outside, but I knew that wouldn't last forever. Sooner or later, someone would come looking for her. And when they did, I had to be ready. Lily and I had spent the morning talking and trying to figure out a plan. It wasn't easy, especially when all I could offer her was the shelter of this garage. But I knew I couldn't just sit here waiting for the world to catch up with us. As the day wore on, I realized something. I needed help. My past wasn't something I could outrun alone, and I wasn't going to let Lily face it with just me. There were people out there who owed me, people I could call in to help. But it meant stepping back into a world I had left behind, one filled with dangers I'd spent years avoiding. I wasn't sure if it was the right choice, but I couldn't afford to hesitate. That night, after dinner, I made the decision. I needed to make a phone call. I could feel Lily's eyes on me as I stood by the old rotary phone hanging on the wall, the dim light from the single bulb overhead casting long shadows on the floor. She was sitting on the cot, her eyes wide, watching me with a mix of curiosity and worry. She had no idea who I was going to call, or what I was about to do. I didn't blame her. My life was something she couldn't even begin to understand. But I was going to do whatever it took to make sure she was safe. The phone rang twice before someone picked up. The voice on the other end was rough, familiar. "Jake," the man said, his voice low. "Been a long time." "Yeah, too long," I replied, keeping my tone even. "I need a favor." There was a pause on the other end. "What kind of favor?" he asked, sensing the seriousness in my voice. "I've got a kid here," I said, my voice dropping slightly. "She's in trouble, and I need help keeping her safe." The line was silent for a moment, and I could practically hear the wheels turning in his head. Finally, he spoke. "You know what that means, right? You call in for help, things get messy. You're bringing her into something you don't want her to see." I took a deep breath, knowing what was coming. "I don't care," I said firmly. "She's not going back to the life she came from. I'll deal with the mess." There was another pause before the man sighed. "All right, I'll send some people over. You know the drill. They'll keep an eye on her, make sure no one's looking for her." I nodded, though I knew he couldn't see it. "Thanks," I said, before hanging up the phone. I turned to see Lily still watching me, her eyes full of questions. "What's going to happen now?" she asked, her voice small. I walked over to her and knelt down, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. "I've got some friends who are going to help us," I said, my voice softer this time. "But it's not going to be easy. People will come looking for you, and when they do, we'll be ready." She nodded slowly, her face serious. "I trust you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Those words hit me harder than I expected. I had spent so much of my life keeping people at arm's length, but here she was, trusting me with her life. I wasn't going to let her down. The next few days passed in a blur of preparation. My contacts arrived, taking positions around the garage, making sure Lily was never left alone. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was necessary. I kept a low profile, staying close to Lily, watching the streets for any sign of trouble. But nothing came. The days turned into weeks, and the longer we stayed hidden, the more I began to wonder if I had made the right choice. Was I just keeping her safe from the world, or was I holding her back from something more? One night, after a particularly long day, I sat on the old chair in the corner of the garage, staring at the shadows on the walls. Lily was asleep on the cot, her small frame curled up under the blanket I had given her. She looked peaceful, but I knew the storm was still coming. And when it did, I had to be ready. My phone buzzed in my pocket, pulling me from my thoughts. I pulled it out and looked at the screen. It was a message from my contact. They're getting close. Time to move. I felt my stomach tighten. The moment I had been waiting for, dreading, was finally here. I stood up and walked over to Lily, kneeling down beside her. She stirred, her eyes opening slowly. "What's happening?" she asked, her voice thick with sleep. "We're leaving," I said softly. "We have to go." She nodded, rubbing her eyes, and slowly climbed out of bed. "Are we going somewhere safe?" she asked, her voice small. "We're going to be all right," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "Stay close to me, okay?" She didn't hesitate. "Okay." I grabbed my jacket and started for the door, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't know where we were going yet, but I knew one thing. Whatever came next, I would protect her, no matter what. I could feel the tension in the air as we moved through the night. The plan was simple, or at least it was supposed to be. Get Lily out of the garage, make it to the safe house on the outskirts of town, and lay low for a while. But nothing was ever that easy. The cold air bit into my skin as I glanced over my shoulder. The shadows seemed to stretch longer, the darkness thicker, as though something was following us. I pushed the thought aside, focusing on Lily, who was walking beside me, her small hand gripping mine. She didn't say a word, but I could feel the fear radiating from her, even though she was trying so hard to be brave. "Stay close," I murmured, my voice low. She nodded, her eyes wide as she glanced around. We moved quickly through the alley, the muffled sound of footsteps echoing in the empty streets. I wasn't used to being this careful. In my past life, I had learned to move fast and keep a low profile, but tonight was different. Tonight, I had something more precious to protect. My eyes darted around as I led Lily through the back streets, the wind howling in the distance. The snow had stopped falling, but the streets were still slick with ice. Every turn we took felt like a calculated risk, but I wasn't about to let anyone find us. We finally reached the edge of the town, the headlights of the car we had been waiting for cutting through the fog. The car's engine hummed softly, a beacon in the darkness. As I reached for the door, I heard it, footsteps. My heart skipped a beat. It wasn't just the wind. Someone was behind us. "Get in the car," I whispered urgently, pushing Lily toward the open door. I glanced back, my pulse quickening. There were shadows moving in the distance, too many to ignore. We had to go now. As Lily climbed into the car, I slammed the door shut and slid into the front seat. The engine roared to life as I slammed my foot on the gas, the car lurching forward into the night. My eyes stayed glued to the rearview mirror as we sped down the road. I could see the figures in the distance, their dark shapes closing in on us. They were getting closer. The sound of tires screeching against the pavement echoed in the night as I swerved around the corner, pushing the car to its limits. Lily let out a startled gasp as the car jolted with each turn. I could see her in the rearview mirror, her small face pale, but she was holding on tight, just like I had told her. "Don't worry," I said, trying to reassure her, though I wasn't sure if I was convincing either of us. "We're almost there." The car's headlights cut through the fog as we turned onto a desolate stretch of road, the small house at the end of it barely visible in the distance. This was supposed to be our safe house, our place to hide for a while. But as we neared it, I saw the flicker of movement, more shadows. Someone was already there. "Get down," I hissed, hitting the brakes. The car screeched to a halt, the engine still running as I turned off the lights. I looked at Lily, her eyes wide with fear. I could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on me. We were almost there, but we weren't safe yet. "Stay quiet," I whispered. I could hear the voices now, muffled in the distance. They were too close. I had to think fast. My mind raced as I scanned the area. There was no way we could go forward, not with them waiting for us. My heart pounded as I considered our options. We could turn back, but that meant running into more of them. And I couldn't risk that. Without saying a word, I shifted the car into reverse and backed up slowly, careful not to make any noise. The headlights were off, and the only sound was the low hum of the engine. We couldn't go to the safe house, not yet. But we had to keep moving. I glanced over at Lily, who was clutching her seat, her eyes wide with confusion. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice trembling. I didn't have an answer, not yet. I didn't know where we were going. All I knew was that we had to keep moving. We couldn't stop, not until we were safe. The road stretched out before us, dark and endless, but it was the only place I could take her. As we sped down the road, I glanced at the rearview mirror once more. I could see the lights of the car behind us, getting closer, but they weren't catching up just yet. We still had a little time, but I knew that time was running out. We had to disappear, and I would do whatever it took to make sure Lily was safe, even if it meant losing myself in the process. I kept my eyes locked on the rearview mirror, the headlights of the car behind us now visible in the distance, getting closer. My heart pounded in my chest as I gripped the steering wheel tighter, pushing the car even faster down the dark, desolate road. The snow was starting to fall again, thick flakes swirling around us in the headlights, but I didn't care. I had to get Lily to safety. The car was still a few miles from the spot where I had planned to take her, a place that was supposed to be safe, hidden from the eyes of those who would do us harm. But I could feel the danger creeping up. Behind us, whoever was following us wasn't going to stop. They wouldn't stop until they had her. I could feel the sweat on the back of my neck, the weight of the responsibility pressing down on me. I had promised Lily safety, but the world I had brought her into wasn't one that offered much of that. We need to lose them, I muttered under my breath, my voice tight. I glanced over at Lily, who was sitting in the passenger seat, her small frame barely visible in the dim light. She was staring straight ahead, her fingers gripping the seatbelt, her face pale and anxious. She had been so quiet since we left the garage, but I could see the fear in her eyes. I didn't blame her. We were both scared. The world we were living in right now wasn't one where you could relax, where you could just breathe. It was a world full of threats, and those threats were closing in on us. I glanced back at the road. The headlights of the car behind us were growing larger, closing the gap. I knew they weren't far behind. My mind raced as I tried to think of a way to lose them. But the road ahead was straight, the only turns up ahead leading to a bridge with no place to hide. I knew I had to act fast. I took a deep breath and swerved the car sharply to the right, heading toward a narrow, unpaved road that led off the main highway. The tires screeched as they lost traction, but the car veered onto the path, bouncing over rocks and snowbanks. "Hold on," I shouted, my foot pushing the gas pedal harder. Lily cried out in surprise, but she didn't say anything else. She was clutching the seat, her face pressed against the window as the car sped down the rough path. The car behind us followed, but it was clear they weren't prepared for the sudden change in direction. I could see their headlights flicker, losing ground. But I wasn't done yet. I pushed the car harder, weaving between trees and brush, trying to put as much distance as possible between us and the people chasing us. I glanced at the rearview mirror again. The car was still following, but they were farther behind now, the headlights growing dimmer. I could feel the tension in my shoulders start to ease, but I wasn't about to let my guard down. Not yet. The road ahead was unclear, and I couldn't risk a mistake. I focused all my attention on the winding path, trying to keep the car steady as it jolted over the uneven ground. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I took a sharp turn and pulled the car into a small clearing off the road. I cut the engine, and the car coasted to a stop. The silence that followed was deafening. My breath came in shallow bursts as I wiped the sweat from my brow, trying to steady myself. I turned to Lily, who was staring out the window, her eyes wide with fear. "Are we safe?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't answer right away. I just stared ahead, listening for the sound of the car behind us, waiting for any sign that they had followed us off the road. But the only sound was the wind, the distant howl of the storm still raging outside. I wanted to say yes. I wanted to tell her that we were safe, that nothing would happen to us. But the truth was, I didn't know. I didn't know what was going to happen next. "I think we're safe for now," I said finally, my voice low. "But we need to stay here for a while, stay quiet." Lily nodded, her eyes searching my face, trying to find something to hold on to. She didn't say anything more, but I could see the relief in her eyes. She had put her trust in me, and I wasn't going to let her down. Not now. Not ever. I sat back in the seat, the reality of the situation starting to hit me. We had lost them, for now. But I knew it wouldn't be long before they came looking for us again. There was nowhere in this world that would stay hidden forever. We had to keep moving, keep fighting. For Lily, for both of us. We had no choice. As I glanced over at her, I saw her finally relaxing, her small shoulders dropping as the tension eased from her face. But I knew this wasn't over. The battle was just beginning. And whatever happened next, I wasn't going to stop until I made sure she was safe. I stayed still for what felt like hours, my eyes fixed on the rearview mirror, listening for any sound that might tell me we weren't alone. The only noise was the soft hum of the car's engine, the sound of the wind pushing against the windows. Lily was sitting quietly beside me, her small face pressed against the window, her eyes wide, scanning the darkness outside. I could see the faint outline of the forest surrounding us, but there was nothing else. It was eerily calm. "What's going to happen now?" Lily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Her question hung in the air between us, heavy with uncertainty. I didn't have an answer. I wanted to reassure her, to tell her that everything was going to be okay. But the truth was, I didn't know. I wasn't sure how much longer we could keep running. The road was long, and there were too many people who wanted to find us, too many people who would stop at nothing to get to her. "We'll be okay," I said, though even I wasn't sure of the words that came out of my mouth. I looked over at her, trying to give her a reassuring smile. She returned a small, uncertain smile of her own, but I could see the fear still in her eyes. I couldn't blame her. She was just a kid, and she had already been through so much. The weight of what she had lost, the life she had known, pressed down on her like an invisible weight, and I could feel it in the silence between us. The sound of tires crunching on the road broke the stillness, and I glanced in the rearview mirror again. The lights of the car that had been following us were still visible, but they weren't as close as before. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. We couldn't stop yet. We needed to keep moving. I drove for what felt like hours, the cold of the night pressing in on us, the tension in the car building with every mile. I was trying to think, to plan ahead, but my mind kept going in circles. Where could we go? How could I keep her safe when there were so many people out there looking for her? I glanced over at Lily, who was staring out the window now, her face reflecting the faint glow of the dashboard lights. "Are you okay?" I asked, breaking the silence. She nodded slowly but didn't say anything. I could tell she wasn't okay, but I didn't push it. She needed space, and I wasn't going to force her to talk. I reached down to the console and pulled out a map, spreading it across the seat. We were almost out of options. I had one more place to go, but I knew it was risky. There was no guarantee that it would be safe, and if we were found there, it could be worse than anything we had faced so far. But it was all I had. "We're heading to a place I know," I said, keeping my voice calm. "It's not far, but we'll have to be careful when we get there. There's a chance we'll be safe for a while, but we need to lay low." I could see Lily nodding in the corner of my eye, but she didn't say anything. I didn't blame her. She was starting to understand the gravity of the situation. We couldn't keep running forever. The silence stretched out between us again, but this time it felt different. It was quieter, somehow more solemn, as though both of us were coming to terms with the uncertainty of what lay ahead. I kept my eyes on the road, the headlights cutting through the thick darkness, and I wondered if we would make it there before anyone else did. I couldn't afford to wait. I couldn't afford to let anyone find us. The storm outside had picked up again, the wind howling louder as the snow began to fall faster, covering the roads, making it harder to see. I slowed the car down, trying to be cautious as I maneuvered through the treacherous road. The snow was already piling up, and it was becoming more difficult to tell which direction we were headed. I looked back in the rearview mirror one last time. The car that had been following us was gone. For now. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. I knew this wasn't over, but for the first time in a long while, I felt like we might just make it. I glanced over at Lily again. She was still staring out the window, but her grip on her seat had loosened slightly. She was calming down, and maybe, just maybe, we had a chance. We pulled off the main road and onto a smaller, more secluded path. The house was up ahead, just a few miles away. I could see the lights now, the faint glow of a cabin in the distance. This was it. This was the place. As we approached, I slowed the car, taking care to keep the noise to a minimum. I didn't want to alert anyone, not just yet. When we finally reached the house, I parked the car behind some trees, out of sight from the road. I looked over at Lily, who was watching me closely. "We're here," I said softly. "Stay close to me, okay?" She nodded, her eyes wide, but there was something different about her now. A glimmer of trust, maybe, or just the quiet acceptance that whatever came next, we would face it together. I opened the door and stepped out into the cold, the crunch of snow beneath my boots the only sound in the otherwise silent night. This was the moment, the one I had been waiting for, the one where everything changed. I could feel the weight of it in my chest, but I wasn't afraid. I had something worth fighting for. I had Lily, and I was going to make sure nothing, no one, took her from me. I stepped out of the car, my boots crunching on the fresh snow, and looked around. The house was just a few hundred yards away, tucked behind a thick line of trees. It looked so quiet, almost too quiet, but that was what we needed right now. I glanced over at Lily, still sitting in the passenger seat, her eyes wide with uncertainty. She had been through so much already, and I could see the fear in her eyes. But there was also something else, something that told me she was starting to trust me. I opened the door to the car and motioned for her to come. "Come on," I said softly, trying to sound as calm as possible. She nodded and stepped out, her small feet crunching the snow as she walked towards me. The night air was cold and sharp, biting into my skin, but it wasn't enough to freeze the anxiety in my chest. We were almost there, but I knew we couldn't relax just yet. I had to make sure we were safe, and that meant staying alert. The cabin was the safest place I could think of right now. It was hidden enough that no one would be able to find us easily, but there was still a risk. We couldn't stay in one place for too long. I glanced around, checking the tree line once more before heading toward the cabin with Lily close behind. The lights inside were dim, but I could see the glow from the window. It was a small place, nothing fancy, but it would do. The door creaked as I opened it, and we stepped inside. The warmth of the cabin immediately hit us, the heat from the small wood stove melting away the cold that had been clinging to us. I closed the door behind us, locking it quietly. Lily stood still for a moment, taking in her surroundings. The room was simple, an old couch, a small table, and a fireplace. It didn't look like much, but it was enough for now. "Are we safe here?" Lily asked, her voice small, the uncertainty still lingering. I didn't answer right away. I walked over to the window and pulled the curtain back just a little, peering outside. The road was empty, the trees silent in the dark. We had some time, but not much. "For now," I said, turning back to her. "But we have to stay low. Don't make any noise, okay?" She nodded, her eyes never leaving me. I could see the fear in her, but there was something else too. She was starting to understand that this wasn't a game, that we were in real danger. "I'm going to make us something to eat," I said, walking over to the small stove in the corner. I wasn't much of a cook, but I could make a decent meal with the canned food I had. I started to heat some soup, the smell filling the cabin. "I'm not hungry," Lily said quietly from behind me. I turned around, surprised. "You need to eat," I said, my voice soft but firm. "You need to keep your strength up." She looked away, but I could tell she wasn't going to argue. I walked over and handed her a bowl, setting it down on the table in front of her. "You have to eat," I repeated. She picked up the spoon and stirred the soup slowly, but she didn't seem to have the appetite. She looked so small sitting there, her shoulders hunched, her face drawn with exhaustion. I sat down across from her, my eyes studying her. I could feel the weight of the responsibility pressing down on me, but I wasn't about to let her see that. "You're safe here," I said, trying to sound reassuring. "No one is going to hurt you. I won't let them." She met my gaze, her eyes searching mine. For a brief moment, I saw something flicker in her, something that looked like hope, like she was starting to believe me. She took a small sip of the soup, then set the spoon down. "Thank you," she said quietly, almost to herself. I wasn't sure if she was thanking me for the soup, for the shelter, or for keeping her safe, but I didn't need her to say anything more. I could feel it. I was doing what I had promised to do. As we sat in silence, I realized that this was only the beginning. We couldn't stay here forever. The people looking for us wouldn't stop. But for tonight, for now, we had a small window of peace. I stood up and grabbed the blankets from the corner, spreading them out on the couch. "You should rest," I said. "We'll need to keep moving soon, but we can take a break for now." Lily didn't argue. She crawled into the blankets and curled up, her eyes closing. I turned off the lights and sat in the chair by the window, keeping watch. The wind howled outside, but the cabin felt safe, for the moment. I kept my eyes on the dark road ahead, knowing that the next step would come soon enough. But for tonight, I could rest. For tonight, Lily was safe. And that was all that mattered. I woke up to the sound of the wind howling outside, a sharp, eerie noise that made the walls of the small cabin feel thinner. The fire in the stove had long burned out, leaving a cold stillness in the air. I stretched, rubbing my eyes as I slowly got to my feet. The night had passed uneventfully, but I knew we couldn't afford to stay too comfortable for too long. We needed to keep moving. I glanced over at Lily, who was still curled up on the couch, her face soft in sleep. She looked so young, so fragile in that moment. I hated that this was the life she had to live now, the constant fear, the running, the uncertainty. But there was no turning back. I couldn't undo what had happened, and I couldn't change the fact that she was now in my care. All I could do was protect her, as much as I could, for as long as I could. The silence in the cabin was broken by the sound of her stirring, her small hands rubbing her eyes as she sat up slowly. She yawned, glancing around the room, clearly disoriented for a moment. When her eyes landed on me, she smiled faintly, but it was a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Morning," she said softly, her voice still thick with sleep. "Morning," I replied, trying to keep my tone light. I wasn't fooling either of us, though. We both knew what today meant. Today meant more moving, more hiding, and more uncertainty. It meant more of this life I had dragged her into. She sat up fully and wrapped her arms around herself, trying to keep warm. I could see the hesitation in her movements, the way she was holding herself together, like she was trying to make herself smaller so that the world couldn't see her. I hated it. It wasn't supposed to be like this. "Are you hungry?" I asked, standing up and heading toward the small stove. She nodded, but her gaze stayed fixed on the fire, as if she was waiting for something to happen. "We don't have much left, but I'll make something," I said, trying to offer some semblance of normalcy. As I cooked, I could feel her eyes on me. It wasn't like before, when she had been full of fear and uncertainty, constantly looking over her shoulder, wondering if someone would show up to take her away. Now there was something else in her gaze. It was almost like she had accepted that this was her life now, and it broke my heart. I finished cooking the small meal, canned beans and some crackers, and brought it over to her. She didn't say anything, just took the bowl and started eating, but I could see that she was deep in thought. After a few minutes of silence, she set the bowl down and looked up at me. "Do you think they'll find us here?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Her eyes were wide with fear, but she was trying to hide it. I could see the cracks in her brave facade. She was still a little girl, despite everything. I sat down across from her, my mind racing for the right answer. "I don't know," I said honestly, my voice low. "But we're doing everything we can to stay ahead of them. We'll keep moving, keep staying one step ahead." She nodded, though I could see the uncertainty still lingering in her eyes. "I'm scared," she said quietly, her voice breaking slightly. The words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of everything she had been through. I reached across the table, placing a hand on hers. "I know you are," I said softly. "But you're not alone. Not anymore. I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." She looked at me for a long moment, as if trying to gauge whether or not she could trust me. Finally, she nodded again, though it was a small, reluctant movement. "I trust you," she said, her voice barely audible. The words made my chest tighten. She trusted me. It was all I could ask for. I knew that keeping her safe wasn't going to be easy, but at that moment, I knew I would do anything to make sure she was all right. I stood up and walked over to the window, glancing outside. The storm had died down, but the landscape still looked desolate, cold. I knew we couldn't stay here much longer. We had to keep moving, but where could we go? The options were running out. I turned back to Lily. "We're going to have to leave soon," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "But we'll figure it out. We always do." She nodded slowly, standing up and gathering the few things we had. She was quiet, focused, and I could see that the fear was still there, buried under the surface. But she was trying. We both were. I grabbed my jacket and slung it over my shoulders, then walked to the door. I opened it carefully, peering outside to make sure no one was watching. The coast was clear, at least for now. We couldn't afford to be seen, not even for a second. I glanced back at Lily, who was standing just behind me, her small figure almost hidden by the doorframe. "Ready?" I asked. She nodded, her hand reaching out for mine. "Ready." We stepped outside together, the cold air hitting us like a wall. The world was still quiet, but I knew the danger was always lurking. As we walked down the path, I could feel the weight of what was ahead of us. We weren't safe yet, but we would be, eventually. And as long as I was there with her, I would make sure she didn't have to face it alone. I kept my hand on Lily's as we walked through the dark woods, the snow crunching beneath our boots. The chill in the air felt sharper tonight, the wind stronger, but I knew we couldn't stop. I glanced over at her as we moved, noticing how her small frame seemed even more fragile under the weight of the night. She wasn't saying much, her face a mixture of exhaustion and worry. She had been through so much already, and I hated that I couldn't offer her more than this endless running, this hiding. But I wasn't about to give up. I had promised her that I would keep her safe, and that was exactly what I was going to do. We reached the edge of the forest and stopped by an old dirt road. The headlights of a car were visible in the distance, and I felt my chest tighten. They had found us, or at least someone was looking for us. I could hear the sound of the engine getting closer, the headlights growing brighter. My heart raced as I pulled Lily behind a tree, trying to stay hidden in the shadows. The car slowed as it approached, the sound of tires scraping against the frozen ground. I held my breath, praying that they wouldn't see us. The car passed by slowly, its lights sweeping over the trees, but it didn't stop. I waited, counting the seconds, until the sound of the engine faded into the distance. When I was sure they were gone, I let out a sigh of relief and pulled Lily closer to me. "We need to keep moving," I whispered, my voice low and urgent. She nodded silently, her eyes wide with fear. "We couldn't afford to." "Stop, not now." I looked around, trying to get my bearings. We were far enough from the cabin now, but I needed to find a place where we could lay low for a while. I knew that staying on the road was too dangerous. We couldn't risk getting caught out in the open. "There's a barn a few miles from here," I said, pointing toward a faint outline in the distance. "It's not much, but it'll keep us hidden for a while." We started walking again, my steps quick and deliberate, keeping my senses sharp. I could feel the cold creeping into my bones, but I ignored it. I had to focus on getting us to safety. I glanced over at Lily. She was still holding my hand, her fingers trembling slightly, but she wasn't complaining. She was trying to be brave, and I could see it in her face. I could see the determination beneath the fear. We walked in silence for what felt like hours, the only sounds the crunch of our footsteps and the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. The barn came into view, a small silhouette against the dark sky. It wasn't much, but it would do. I led Lily inside, the heavy wooden doors creaking as I pushed them open. The interior was dim, with just a few rays of moonlight filtering through cracks in the walls. The smell of hay and dust filled the air, and I could see the outlines of old farming tools scattered around the floor. I walked over to a corner and set down the bag I had been carrying. "We'll stay here for the night," I said quietly. "Get some rest. We'll leave early tomorrow." Lily nodded and sat down on a bale of hay, curling up for warmth. I sat beside her, keeping watch as she tried to sleep. The barn was quiet, but I knew we couldn't stay here for long. We couldn't afford to grow complacent. The people looking for us wouldn't stop, and we had to be ready for whatever came next. As I sat there, watching Lily sleep, I thought about the long road ahead of us. I had no idea where we would go next, or what we would do. But I knew one thing for sure. As long as I was alive, I wasn't going to let anything happen to her. I would fight for her, protect her with everything I had. I had lost too much in my life to let her slip away. And no matter how hard it got, I wasn't going to stop. Not until she was safe. The cold night stretched on, the wind picking up outside. But inside the barn, it was quiet. Lily slept peacefully, and for the first time in a while, I felt a small sense of hope. We weren't done yet. The battle wasn't over. But we were still alive. And that was enough for now. I sat in the quiet barn, the weight of the night settling over me. Lily was still asleep, curled up on the hay, her breathing slow and steady. For a brief moment, I allowed myself to relax. I thought back on everything that had led us here, the choices I had made, the promises I had kept. I had dragged her into this life, and now, there was no turning back. We were in this together, and no matter what came next, I was going to protect her. The soft rustling of the wind outside was the only sound, the branches of the trees swaying in the night. My eyes drifted over to the faint glow of the moon outside, casting long shadows across the barn. It was peaceful here, for now, but I knew it wouldn't last. The people who had been chasing us wouldn't stop. I couldn't let my guard down. The weight of what I had promised hung in the air, but there was also something else, hope. I had seen it in Lily's eyes earlier that night, a small spark that told me she was beginning to believe we could make it. I wasn't sure how much longer we could stay here, but I wasn't going to let her down. She needed to know that no matter what, she wasn't alone. I stood up slowly, stretching my stiff limbs. The air in the barn was cool, but I could feel the warmth of the promise I had made. I would protect her, even if it meant sacrificing everything. I checked the windows again, making sure no one was watching, then moved toward the door. The creaking of the old barn door was a familiar sound, but tonight it felt different. This was the last time we would be here, the last time. I would let my guard down. I had to keep her moving, keep her safe. I walked back to Lily, kneeling down beside her. She stirred slightly, but didn't wake. I brushed a strand of hair from her face, my heart swelling with a fierce protectiveness. She had been through so much, but now, there was a sense of peace settling over her. A sense of safety, and I would give her more of it, as much as I could. I stood up, looking out over the road. The faint sound of an engine could be heard in the distance, but it was too far to tell if it was a threat or not. For now, we were safe. But that wouldn't last. I looked at the path ahead. We needed to move again, find a new place to hide, keep running. But I wasn't afraid. As long as Lily was with me, I could face whatever came next. Lily, I whispered, my voice soft, but firm. She woke with a start, her eyes wide with fear, but when she saw me, she relaxed, sitting up slowly. "What is it?" she asked, her voice still thick with sleep. I smiled at her, reaching out to help her stand. "It's time to go," I said, keeping my voice steady. "We can't stay here anymore." She nodded, her eyes following mine as she stood. I knew she was scared, but she didn't argue. We were in this together. And together, we would survive. I grabbed the small bag we had left, and we headed out into the cold night. The world outside was still, the quiet broken only by the crunch of snow under our feet. We moved carefully, staying low, avoiding the road as much as possible. The darkness of the forest closed in around us, and I could feel the tension building. I knew we were being watched, but I couldn't tell from where. Every sound, every movement, seemed amplified in the silence. But we kept moving, keeping our steps light and quiet. As we walked, I couldn't help but think back to the promise I had made. No matter what came next, I would keep her safe. I didn't know where the road would lead us, or how long it would take, but I knew one thing. As long as I had her, I wasn't going to stop. The world may have been closing in around us, but we had each other. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel entirely alone. Together, we were strong, and we were going to make it. We walked into the night, knowing that whatever came next, we would face it side by side.